Okay, welcome to this working example for week number 3, which is the upper arm and the forearm and a bend in the elbow at 90 degrees. Okay, so where do we start with this one? Well, we're going to begin with z-spheres like we did previously, except this time we're not going to dynamesh it. We're going to use the topology that comes out of the z-spheres, and we're just going to develop that because our topological constraints and topological requirements are fairly simple. So we're just going to go ahead with this. So you can see actually what I've done is to just do a couple of simple extrudes with my z-spheres, and I've capped it in a couple places, right? Big one here, which is going to be the chest, intermediate elbow, one intermediate here, and this is going to be the hand. And we're just going to block the hand in to start with to essentially give us gesture for the wrist, because a stump right there doesn't really mean much in context of forearm flexing or being pronated or supinated. So we're going to block the hand in, and we can choose to cut it off at a later point if we don't want to finish it, because really we're just going to have to carve into this topology, and it's not going to be perfect for what we're trying to achieve. So we'll decide on that later, but right now I'm just going to show you how we proceed with the z-spheres. And the first thing is classic skinning. I often use classic skinning just to give myself a very low-res proxy for pushing and pulling, and in some ways it's better than the new skinning if you're just doing simple things. And that's all I really want, is just some very loose topology to pull around with the move tool. And that's where I am now. So I'm really just blocking in the chest, and we're going to have chest cut off almost like you see in here, up to kind of just above the clavicle, down, not even as far as the sternum, more this side. And then we'll build the arm out from there. So you'll see I'm just kind of conforming the shape of the mesh. And really this is all just at level 1. I don't even think I have any subdivisions yet. So this is just kind of putting the broad contours in, right? So you're trying to get some of this, a little bit of this, and a little bit of the volumes of the forearm, right? And a little bit of the lats. And then I'm just going to try to square these two off, and eventually I will crease those. Okay, so just more refining, and this is me getting ready to crease. So I've just done a visibility selection on these interfaces, and you can see I'm just going to smooth this out, and I've creased it. My crease tolerance is pretty low, so I'm getting a crease here. So I set that to all the way to 180 degrees, so it should crease nothing, or whatever the max of the slider is, except for what you get from the visibility, and that's what I've gotten. Okay, so you can see I have a crease there. Now I'm going to proceed and try to crease the bottom, just because we want that to be solid too. So you can see I'm just doing again a visibility selection, and I'll crease based on that. And you can see I've done that. Okay, so now subdiv will show the creased edges, which is just what we want, and we'll try to keep that, maintain that integrity throughout the sculpt. Okay, so from here we're starting to just block, and blocking is just really getting the main flows and the main landmarks on the mesh, right? So initially I've kind of put the gesture of the pecs in, going out to the chest, so I can start out to the arm, so I can start to get this overlap with the biceps. And now you can see I'm just going to block in some gesture to the clavicle, a little acromion process, and then back down to the spine of the scapula. So there's the acromion, and this is all still malleable, right? So I'm just really putting these in so that I have a landmark that I can adjust to get to the right place. So this will push and pull around a little bit as I go through the sculpt. From there, we kind of start to try to extend a little bit of the boundaries of the deltoid down to its insertion on the humerus. Bearing in mind how the arm is articulated, right? So it's kind of bent backwards. So instead of the deltoid being resting straight on the side of the body facing out, it's facing backwards. So the humerus is rotated, which is why the arm is sticking up instead of sticking forward. And so we have to kind of get that with our insertion. in the right place. Kind of simple idea, but I thought I would mention it anyways. Okay, from here I'm just going to fix the junction at the elbow. And I go into this in kind of step-by-step in one of the tools and techniques videos, just showing you how to get in there and fix these kind of broken intersections where the mesh really overlaps badly. So check that out. And now that's kind of fixed, and I'm blocking in the elbow. You can see I've started with, as I move backwards, I've started with the medial epicondyle. I'm going to get the olecranon next, which is here. So getting this big block. And then I'm going to take this up, and this is the gesture of the ulnar furrow, right? So we have to be really kind of specific about how this bend goes up and breaks, because this is going to create the pocket for flexor carpi ulnaris on this side, right? And so it will look very funny if this is straight, so we have to be very specific about the gesture. Also, you'll notice this little angle here gives us the direction for all of our extensors going down the back of the forearm, right? So all these things are for a reason. Logically, what comes next is the lateral epicondyle, which I've just indicated, and this will get refined a little bit to match how it's looking in the reference. Grab some high-res reference from the downloads for this week, and you can see that there's a lot of things going on in the area of the lateral epicondyle. The first big thing that I've started to block is the extensor carpi radialis longus, right? So the lower of the two ridge muscles, right, coming off the top, in this case, the upper margin of the ridge of the humerus, or the lateral epicondyle. Okay, just kind of creating some planes there. And that's blocking in the location of the styloid process of the ulna, right? And I want you guys to just feel for yourselves as you rotate kind of with you. If you bend your elbow to 90 degrees and rotate your palm towards you, just like you're doing the pose this guy's in, feel that in this kind of supinated position, so the hand is supine, meaning palm up, the bump, the characteristic bump of the styloid process is lessened by the fact that the radius is rotated around to kind of match up with the edges. Okay, and that's kind of in contrast to if you pronate your palm and turn it the other way, and you'll notice the bump is quite a bit larger. So pay attention to how this appears in the reference, because with the palm supinated. Okay, back to the medial epicondyle. Just starting to block in some of the flow going back, and specifically this kind of intramuscular septum that goes back and creates the boundary for the long head, or the medial head of the tricep coming down here. So we'll just keep our eye on that as we go forward. So just trying to establish some of the main planes and the transitions between big muscle groups. And I'm starting to think that the upper arm is too long as I've laid it out in the Z-spheres. So I'm just going to transpose it in a little bit. And I think I just did that. And I will refine those proportions kind of continuously over time as the volumes and the shapes of the muscle start to get established. You start to have a better appreciation for whether the distance between here and here is correct. We have a rough measurement for that in the model measurements, which is from the lateral epicondyle to the olecranon, but that's in an arm down pose, so I would expect it to be a little bit shorter than that with the arm up at 90 degrees. Okay, blocking in the long head of the triceps, and remembering to get the overlap between latissimus dorsi and teres major and long head of the triceps going back. So we're going to get this kind of transition with one passing behind the other. And then there's this nice gesture where the medial head of the tricep interchanges with the long head. Right, so we keep our eyes out for both of those. And I've also put in a little bit right there of the characteristic kind of flattening of the long head of the tricep due to the tendinous expansion in this area. So it just kind of flattens out the forearm because we know tendon does not flex and bulge like muscle. Okay, just adding volume across the chest. We're getting quite familiar with those shapes, having done 2 weeks on the torso and the arms and shoulders and different articulations. So this is a lot of what we've seen already, so just another chance to practice. And I'm looking kind of for just some of the characteristic shapes that are in the reference with the rear head of the deltoid. You can see that actually if I go back, I drop down to subdivision 2 to just kind of put the right contour in the face, the kind of the cutoff face of the fragment where the trapezius comes up here. Right, so instead of just sculpting up and then having a big precipitous drop off, I've gone to level 2 and just pulled this up with the move brush, just so that it all maintains consistency as it gets towards the edge. Okay, we've seen this a few times. This is the flow of the chest muscles out, a little block of the serratus anterior. And now I've just kind of quickly done an indication of something coming off the medial epicondyle, and this is the pronator teres, right? And in an arm that's disarticulated, right, even a little bit greater than 90 degrees, pronator teres is going to be shooting up towards the other side of the arm, past kind of all this stuff, all the flexors, and it kind of gets washed out in all this flesh here. But occasionally you can see just an indication of the body, and it's ever so subtle in this image. But it's shooting out across, trying to grab onto the radius on the far side. Okay, just working in some of the tendinous characteristics that we see on the flexed arm. And those are quite pronounced, and this is a kind of a danger area because it's very easy to overmodel these things, and I have overmodeled them in this little example, and I take them back. I try not to leave things too harsh when it's just these small forms can easily get overdone. Okay, for this little section, I'm blocking in the ridge muscles, right? So extensor carpi radialis longus and brachioradialis coming off up here. Brachioradialis is going to create this kind of larger volume that's going to establish this edge of the forearm, right? And it's going to be big, and I don't have it quite large enough yet. And you'll see I kind of struggle with the relationship between the ridge muscles on this side and the flexors on this side. As we go forward, try to get the right balance between the two. Okay, I'm just literally blocking in a hand, flirting with the idea of just sculpting it in its entirety, but I don't in the end. But I want to have a decent representation just so that I know which way the hand is turned as I'm working on the forearm muscles and the flexors. Okay, so again, continual assessment of your volumes, right, is very important. At this point, I'm looking to see, actually, does the bicep flare out too much? And this is what I had, and it's kind of unnatural, so I push it in a little bit. You have to do these kind of continuous self-assessments on these volumes that you're creating, because as you refine the forms, you can sometimes let the volume get out of control. And you just have to do a push and a pull. And that's why it's great, again, to have a level 1 mesh, is that you can just go there and fix the things that are getting out of hand without breaking the details that you've already sculpted at higher subdivisions. Okay, so refining the long head of the tricep, just trying to get the plane changes between the different faces and putting a little bit of the volume of the brachialis in. And it's not really creating a lot of form. It's almost a fairly inert section of the arm, but it has a little bit of subtlety to it. And so I'm just trying to get that in place, and that contrasts with the really sharp pull of the biceps tendon going down, and then this big kind of fibrous extension of the biceps tendon, which grabs and lashes down onto the forearm muscles right there. Okay, next I'm going to start to pay attention to flexor tendons coming off, right? They're quite pronounced on him. I don't have a good view of these, but there is a better one provided in the course downloads for this week's assignment. But you'll see the major tendons coming off here, right? So we're going to have flexor carpi ulnaris on this side. We'll have palmaris longus going up the middle, and we'll have flexor carpi radialis on the far side, which is the thumb side. And we'll also see a little bit of flexor digitorum, the superficial flexor finger flexor coming up in between here. And so we kind of have to get all of those, and then give a little bit of volume to the bodies as they come back to the medial epicondyle. And again, you can assess this kind of for yourself on your own forearm, and just see how they pop out. Certainly his are a little bit more pronounced probably than most. So what I've used here is the replay last on a standard brush stroke with lazy mouse enabled. Right, so I've done a nice long lazy mouse stroke with the standard brush at a fairly low intensity, and then I've just replayed it, and it pops it out again and again and again. And it's pretty nice for just pulling up these tendons in a very kind of naturalistic way, I guess. Okay, just a little more flirting with the hand shape. And here is the flexor carpi radialis, right? And this is going to be the biggest of the masses coming back to the medial epicondyle. And this is actually going to juxtapose itself against the mass of the ridge muscles coming down. So we should see a good depression going up between these two. And I don't have it at present, but I will put it in as I start to get further along. So that's a little bit of the volumes of the palmaris longus and the flexor carpi radialis coming down. So those two are coming down almost convergent, and they create the big volume. And then there's a step down, and kind of in that volume we have the the flexor digitorum coming up. Right, and then on the side of that is flexor carpi ulnaris, right? So flexor carpi ulnaris again is going to go all the way out to the ulnar furrow and create that big volume adjacent to the flexor, the extensors. And this is what I'm blocking in now. So this is a look at the volume of the flexor carpi ulnaris coming down adjacent to the ulnar furrow. Okay, looking at the volumes, pulling them out with the move brush. Okay, now I'm going to start to work up the olecranon and maybe pay attention to some of this part of the triceps, which isn't finished yet, which I'll get to. So really just looking at kind of the common tendon coming back and the shape that this is going to create with the kind of lateral head of the tricep, the short head out here. Long head is mostly established, and then we'll have medial head in here. So there's a little bit of the egg in the tail, as I call it. And that abuts with the rear head of the deltoid. All right, so you kind of work those two in combination. And now I'm just trying to look at the mass of the brachialis here, because it's quite a smooth transition in this image, and I'm just trying to set up these subtle planes between the biceps here, kind of more medially, and the brachialis more laterally. Okay, you may have seen that quickly as I went through this. I'll just rewind. And you can see extensor carpi radialis longus and extensor carpi radialis brevis is going to go in right here. Those two are adjacent to themselves, and that's what I'm blocking in right here. And then both of these tendons, we remember, pass under out to the metacarpals, the second and third metacarpal, and we get the thumb muscles passing over top of those tendons. And then over top of the thumb muscles comes extensor digitorum, which on him creates a very prominent mass going right here. Okay, so blocking that in. A little refinement on the trapezius. I can't ignore the forearms for too much longer, so now I'm back to extensor carpi ulnaris, adjacent to flexor carpi ulnaris, with the ulnar furrow going down between them, which again was just a big lazy mouse. And I'll have to refine that because it's a little bit crude as it's done right there. And we should not forget extensor digiti minimi, which needs to go between extensor digitorum here and extensor carpi ulnaris. Digiti minimi is going to run in this little tract. And it's a fine little bit of sculpting to get that in correctly. And conius just went in right here. And this again is just a very subtle convexity. You have to really observe closely on the reference to make it out. Okay, there was digiti minimi. You can see him in there right now. And putting a little volume into extensor digitorum, and then tweaking things again at level 1. So at this point, most of the forearms are blocked in, at least as a start. And so now I'm really looking to capture the gesture, right? Get all the angles, all the profiles consistent with my sculpting as I move forward. Most of the things are flowing origin to insertion pretty well, but now it's just kind of trying to tweak the forms, right? So I'm trying to get this kind of depression that I spoke about between the rigid muscles and the flexors, trying to get that working. It wasn't easy. I had to refine that a few times because my rigid muscles were too big, or my flexors were too big, and my rigid muscles were too small, things like that. So these don't come out of the bag perfect, but you just have to stay on top and continually look with a critical eye to make sure things are in the right place and refining them if they're not. Okay, my coracobrachialis is probably a little bit too big. I know it's too big, and I hope to shave it down sometime here in the future, or at least give him a big tuft of armpit hair to cover it. You know, if I just kind of hair it over, then we might be okay, but I'm not too keen on the fur rendering in ZBrush. So again, really just kind of refining planes now, and you can see how closely I'm zoomed into the mesh. That means it's details and small changes. Again, adjusting volumes. Chest was too thick. So I pulled that around. I'm doing a little assessment with the light. That's what you have to do. You know, really look at your model with different lighting conditions to just make sure that the planes are coherent, no matter how you're observing it. So we're into small tweaks now. Contours in the chest, contours in the lats. Again, more work up on the long head of the triceps. I've hit it with some pretty extreme light, meaning some extreme kind of overhead light, just to give me some high contrast on these forms as they wrap around, so you can really start to make out what's happening. If it's too frontally lit, then you won't get a good read on your shapes. So often I'll go with some harsh lighting. And again, refining just the medial head of the tricep, because it's not large on him, right? And it just kind of creates almost a kind of a squared off transition between all this up here and then back to the bottom side of the arm. That's kind of an elusive one because we generally expect a little more volume in the medial head of the triceps. So really just, again, tweaking small planes. A few big moves in proportions. I just gave the biceps a good lift. I'm going back and tweaking the fold in the arm to just get it up, so I might be able to put some skin folds in there. And actually, this is the final, one of the final battles that I've waged with this contour, which is the one that I've been speaking about. Ridge muscles against flexors, right? And you want this little trough going up between them. So really looking closely at the forms created by the flexor muscles, because they do really pop out on him. And I don't know that I hit them 100% in the end, but they're pretty close. That takes us to the end of the sculpt, this starting session. And it's pretty, I'm not going to say it's an easy sculpt because there's a lot of subtleties to observe. And I really want you guys to get into the details of it and really look closely and try to understand the anatomy that's creating all these things. I explain it a little bit in the lecture overview, just to refresh the anatomy, but you guys need to observe the forms and then just try to translate it into 3D. So have a good go at it, and hopefully you guys can get a good result. Okay, thanks very much, and good luck.